Welcome to Politics PA's Voices of Reason, brought to you by Broad and Liberty. My name is Steve Ulrich, and today I have the pleasure of talking to State Senator Greg Rothman, the Republican of Cumberland County, who's a candidate for the Pennsylvania State GOP chairmanship. Senator Rothman, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks for having me.
For those who don't know your background, could you just give us a little bit of background on yourself, how you got started in politics, and what your thought process is for getting involved in this race?
Yeah, I got inspired by Ronald Reagan in 1980. I was 13 years old watching that election and became a teenage Republican, went off to college in Massachusetts, was a college Republican, was a young Republican when I got out of school. In between that, worked for Jack Kemp when he ran for president in 1988, worked at the United States Senate for the steering committee, was an intern at the Pennsylvania Republican State Committee, and have worked on numerous campaigns. When I got out of college, I went to work for a family business, a real estate business that I eventually became president of and helped grow it into a really strong company. We're 55 years old here in central Pennsylvania. And in 1991, at the beginning of the ground war phase of the Gulf War, I enlisted in the Marine Corps and spent 10 years in the Marine Corps Reserves in an artillery battery in Reading, Pennsylvania. Along the line, during that time, I had 5 children. I've got 4 daughters, and was a donor to the party. And then in 2012, when Rick Santorum ran for president, I traveled around the country. We had been friends from young Republicans in his historic run for president in 2012. Came back and said, I need to put my name on the ballot. I ended up being a state committee, elected to state committee, became a county chair. I would serve 3 terms as county chair. And then I ran for the state House of Representatives in 2015 and served 7 years in the House of Representatives until my seat was blown up in redistricting. But I ran for the Senate and got elected to the Senate. So I had 7 contested elections I won in 7 years, over the course of 7 years, with a lot of grassroots activism and knocking on doors and making phone calls and putting up signs. And so it's been a great run for me. But I think all of it has put me in a place where that I'm sort of, the more I think about it, everything I've done has put me in a place where I could be the ideal state chairman to unite the party and build on the success of Donald Trump's election and promote Trump's America First agenda and turn Pennsylvania into a solidly red, reliable state like Ohio or Florida.
Was this all part of the thought process going through the fall of 2024, or did you need to see the election of Donald Trump, the election of David McCormick to say, yes, now's my time?
No, I had, in fact, I had no thoughts of it at all until December 10th, which I know the date because it was my birthday and it was about 9 o'clock at night. I was not thinking about it at all. I had plans to go into leadership in the Senate. I was going to run the Senate Republican Campaign Committee, which I'd worked on last cycle. Going to be a chairman of a good committee. But I was approached by some people who said, what do you think of this? And I thought about it, and I wrote a list of pluses and minuses, and I know what my abilities are. I know what my passions are. So the question is this an opportunity for me to use those? And the answer was yes. And so I started making calls and, got a lot of support from a lot of people that have served with me in the legislature or served with me on campaigns over the last 40 years, which is crazy. But for 40 years, I've worked on campaigns in Pennsylvania, and all of them from, the Scranton campaign in '86 to I was McCain in '08 and in 12 with Rick Santorum, obviously, and all the Trump campaigns. I worked at the convention in Cleveland and was party chairman in 2016 when we had an historic election. And I told you I've been on the ballot a lot too, but this last election I was not on the ballot because I have a 4-year term, and yet it was the best election of my life. I mean, just to beat Bob Casey and to win those 2 congressional seats, we came up a little short in the House. And that's a priority of mine as party chairman, to win back the House, but to just keep promoting this, to build off of this incredible victory.
Well, we'll talk a little bit more about the State House in a moment, but there are those who are in the know and understand exactly what a party chairman does. For those who aren't quite sure, what all does the job entail?
Yeah, so there are 67 counties, which means there are 67 county parties. I was a county chairman in Cumberland County. I will tell you that's the hardest job in politics. Everybody's a volunteer in the party. We have about 380 state committee members, which include those 67 county chairs. And they get together a few times a year to provide support for our counties. I mean, the county parties are the ones that do the work. And I liken it to there's four legs on a chair. And one of the legs is the volunteers and the activists. They may not be part of the party, but they're the ones that knock on the doors. I knocked on 20,000 doors myself in my campaign. Joe Capozzi from down your area in Philadelphia knocked on 70,000 doors in Philadelphia to win that seat. That's how you win elections. So they're one of the four legs. Also our party people, the people who are elected to serve as committee people. I was one of those when I was 22 years old, and I was a state committee member too. And then the donors. It's important that we have the money. I mean, we don't have the type of donors that the Democrats do. They outraised us about 2-1 in Pennsylvania. And then the final leg of the stool, which is incredibly important, is, and by the way, I like to raise money. I'm one of the rare elected officials who loves raising money because I was a donor too. So like, I get it. I understand Republican donors are investors and they want to invest in ideas and people and plans that are going to bring about a limited government and Republican principles. And then the last is the candidates, and having recruited candidates, having worked for so many candidates over the years, and having been one, I think I'm in a unique position where I get all four of those because I've been part of all four of those legs, and that's how the Republican Party leads. But it's a really a resource for our county parties. Imagine it be like the head or the main office, and we've got 67 branch offices, but they're the ones that do all the work. We have to provide some kind of leadership, some kind of financial support, and also to bring people together to have best practices. And so those are all the things that make it a good state party. And ultimately registering voters and getting Republicans elected.
I wanted to ask you about that. So obviously, Democrats, I believe, is still about 500,000 advantage when it comes to voter registration, but it didn't seem to dissuade Pennsylvanians from voting out Bob Casey, as you said, giving the Commonwealth to Donald Trump. There are a lot of good things that are happening for the state GOP. How do you think you'll be able to strengthen that?
So I remember campaigns where we had 1.5 million voter disadvantage. And the good news is now that they've even cleaned up the active voters, we're down to 200,000. And in some areas, if you look at actually active voters, we're only 118,000 votes apart. So if we can, that's a number one matrix or metric that we would have is how do we register voters? And we have a model. His name is Scott Pressler. He has just been phenomenal. I met Scott years ago when he first came to Pennsylvania, registering voters, finding those people that ought to vote Republican, care about our issues, whether they're hunters or social conservatives or free market people, going to gun shows and going to the farm show, which is going on in Harrisburg this week. Those are the people who aren't registered to vote. We get them to register to vote, and if we get that number even, that'll be one of my main priorities, to register voters. And then you got to get them out. So it's an exciting opportunity.
You mentioned fundraising and the fact that your words that Democrats seem to have more big ticket donors when it comes right down to that. How can you energize the grassroots in, let's say, Huntington County and Erie County, maybe up in Carbon County?
Yeah, so it's about investing. And a lot of times these donors are investing in candidates, not the party, because they don't see the benefit of the party. So I'm going to work with the candidates, work with the leadership in the legislature, work with our congressional delegation, obviously work with Senator McCormick, and to make sure that the party has the resources, that we can do things that candidates can't do. We can bring people together and prepare a team that when we do have the candidate for governor in 2026, we already have a team in place that can help drive out the voters and get people elected in November, so we can beat Josh Shapiro, which would be another priority of mine.
So when you talk about Republicans, is one of your jobs to make it more of a big tent? Because I think you'll still hear people say, "Are you a traditional Republican? Are you a MAGA Republican?" Is the tent big enough to hold all? I guess is what the question is.
Yeah, look, I support every one of Donald Trump's policies. I have from the time he took office. but we also have people in the Republican Party that aren't as conservative as I am. And when you're a party chairman, or when you're trying to get 102 Republicans elected in the House, when I was HRCC chairman, I was responsible for that. You realize that there are parts of the state that we need a different type of candidate. And to me, it's about getting anybody who wants to be a Republican or is a Republican. They don't have to agree with me 100% of the time, and that'd be pretty boring anyway. And so the party's open to everybody. Now, I say that, and I think our policies and our principles are appealing to everybody. And sometimes it's just the tone, and it's the taking the efforts. I mean, when I ran for the House and when I ran for the Senate, I knocked doors in every mobile home park in my district, and there are a lot of them. I went door to door in mobile home parks where I met people who said, a woman said to me, "I'm 80 years old. I've never met a politician. Certainly none has ever showed up at my door." And I said, "Well, I'm not a politician, but I want your vote." And she said, "No one's ever asked me for my vote." And by the way, she had a Trump sign, a Trump flag hanging from her mobile home. And those are places that Republicans have to go. And apartment complexes and new immigrants, legal immigrants who come to our country, we need to reach out to them, but also farmers and the Amish, and those who may be cynical about politics, that their vote doesn't make a difference. We need to go to all of them and not just register them, but then get them out to vote. But look, everyone's welcome on this team. That's how you win.
Pennsylvania's junior Senator Dave McCormick, the newly elected Senator Dave McCormick, said that you have the political savvy, you have the ability to connect, create, maintain relationships, and offered you his endorsement for the position. What does that mean?
Well, look, I'm flattered and honored. I mean, I think Dave McCormick pulled out an incredible historic win. I mean, we've been dealing with Bob Casey since, I mean, as long as I can remember. I mean, the first campaign was when his father was running against Bill Scranton, that I was involved in. So it's great to see the Senator Casey, who I thought was a horrible senator from Pennsylvania, for Pennsylvania, did nothing for us. Voted against our interest on a regular basis, and now is, you saw how he responded to him losing the race. It just wouldn't accept it, and was not a good loser. So I'm grateful for Dave McCormick. I mean, that's going to change the trajectory of Pennsylvania. We need a United States senator who's active in the party. It's very easy for them to go to Washington and say, well, the state's the state. I don't have to run again for 6 years. Senator McCormick is interested in building the party. It's his vision, too, that I've bought into, that we can be a solidly red state. In the year 2000, when the Bush-Gore race, Pennsylvania, Florida, and Ohio were the swing states, and you had to win 2 of the 3. Well, Ohio and Florida are no longer swing states. They're solid Republican states. So how great would it be if we could turn Pennsylvania into another Ohio or Florida when it comes to voting Republican?
That's an interesting point. I was reading something today that talked about Democrats need to do more than bank on the blue wall because of demographic changes. What kind of strategies do you have to be able to lessen the Democratic advantages in, let's say, southeastern Pennsylvania, Allegheny County? Because when you look at between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, you have a pretty good thing going right now.
Yeah, so it's peace and prosperity, right? I mean, we're going to depend on President Trump and his administration to end these wars in the Middle East and in Ukraine, and to push the former Soviet Union, Russia, back out of Ukraine. We're going to look for peace through strength, which has worked over and over again in the history of our country, and we're going to look for prosperity. And I think ultimately, going back to campaigns, people vote their pocketbooks. And Joe Biden and the Democrats, with what they did the last 4 years, really shows the contrast between Republican principles and Democratic principles. Before that, it was, well, these are theoretical. Well, we saw what happens when Democrats are in charge. And if it wasn't for the Republicans in the state Senate, and before that, when I was in the state House, all kinds of horrible things could have happened in Pennsylvania that were stopped, and are still being stopped by the senators, my colleagues in the state Senate. And we need a Republican governor, and so that'll help too. So yeah, I mean, election integrity is a big deal. I introduced the language that turned into Act 88, which said election boards, when they start counting, have to start election day and don't stop counting until they're done. I told the story that we were talking about Penn State earlier. My dad was a season ticket holder. We used to go to Penn State games. It wasn't until I was old enough to know better that I found out there was a fourth quarter, because at the end of the third quarter, my dad would stand up and say, "Let's go." And we'd get in the car and drive home. And you know what? Like, there still was a fourth quarter and there still was a score. And by the end of the game, you could look up at the scoreboard and see who won. And elections are the same way, Steve. We ought to know who won the night of the election, or at least early in the morning the next morning. And this idea that we're going to wait weeks to find out results is not right. And so I think we fixed that. We had a bill that created an audit where the counties had to tell us how many outstanding votes there were. So sure, we have absentee ballots coming from military and overseas, and they have a few more days to vote. And we need to, I mean, certainly those who are serving our country, their vote should count too. We need to give them those extra 3 days. I'm fine with that. But we need voter ID. That's a big deal. And we need to take advantage of the mail-in voting and the early voting. I know early voting is a nebulous term, but to vote before the election, which I did. I went to my local county, handed them my driver's license because they asked for it. They handed me a ballot. 2 weeks before the election, I banked my vote. And we need to embrace that as a party, and we need to codify some of that in the law.
The Republican Party of Pennsylvania had a pretty great year in 2024, as we talked
Awesome.
about, winning the Senate seat. Did everything but win back the state house. Remains a Democrat 101 majority. What kind of strategies would you like to employ to see the state house flip back to the Republican side?
Yeah, and not that there's a correlation, but when I was chairman, we picked up 3 seats and won 3 special elections, including Casey Tomlinson down in your area. First of all, I racked my brain trying to figure out why we didn't pick up at least 1 seat, and I've come up with a couple conclusions. Number one, the Democrats outspent Republicans 2-1. We need to have some parity in supporting our candidates financially, which I will help to do. Number two, the map that was drawn was a total gerrymandered map. You know, everyone talked about gerrymandering or gerrymandering because it was Governor Gary in Massachusetts who started it. Yet it all got silent after that 2020, after the redistricting. And by the way, my House seat got crossed the Susquehanna River, got put into 5 different House seats. So I know all about gerrymandering because they did it to me. And then the third reason is every incumbent in the House got reelected. The power of incumbency is that's part of the factor. So what do we need to do? We need to recruit great candidates. We need to make every seat in play. We need to spend the money, and then we need to put up a contrast. And I think people are going to see this is what happens when you get Republicans in office. Their economy is going to come back, prices come down, inflation will be non-existent again, and America will be a leader on the foreign scene too, where people understand that there's peace through strength, and we're the strongest country in the world and the greatest country in the world. So I'm excited about that, and we'll close the border too.
What I was going to ask you to close by giving me a 1-minute stump speech, but I think you did that very well right there. Would there be anything else you'd like to tell our listeners as to why you should be the choice for the chair of the Republican Party?
Yeah, I think for me, I look at my life experiences, my political experiences that I've won where I've been involved. I've learned from mistakes because certainly I've made plenty of them. But that if you think of that 4-legged stool, that they're all equally important, and I understand that because I've been part of all 4 of those legs, and I think that'll make me an outstanding chairman. But I don't intend to do it by myself. I need everybody involved, and whether they're brand new Republicans that came in because of Donald Trump, or they've been lifelong Republicans that have been toiled in the vineyards like I did for 40 years, they're all welcome to this party.
Our thanks to State Senator Greg Rothman, Republican from Cumberland County, for joining us today on Voices of Reason. Greg, thank you.
Thank you, Steve.